Okay, we're about 2 minutes out.
Hello, and welcome to the 6th Bristol Representative District Debate, hosted by the Herald News. A few housekeeping items before we get started. My name is Will Richmond, City Editor at the Herald News, and I will serve as moderator for tonight's debate. With me is incumbent Democrat Carol Fiola and her Republican challenger, Dr. David Steinhoff. I'd like to thank our host, Bristol Community College and Fall River Community Media, for providing this space and broadcasting tonight's debate live on both television and streamed online. Tonight's debate is intended to be a discussion of issues of importance to both the 6th District and the state. Tonight we will start with 3-minute opening statements from each candidate and conclude with 3-minute closing statements. In between, each candidate will have the opportunity to answer questions posed by myself. Responses will be limited to 2 minutes with the opportunity to offer a 1-minute rebuttal. Additional rebuttals will be added at my discretion. A timekeeper is present to inform the candidates when their time is running out. The order of opening and closing statements was determined prior to tonight's debate through a coin toss. The candidates will then rotate with the opportunity to offer the first response to questions. Both candidates are asked to keep their responses on topics to the questions posed. The Herald News would like to begin by thanking both candidates for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the first opening statement, we will begin with Carol Fiola.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Carol Fiola, and I'm your state representative for the 6th Bristol District, covering Fall River and Assonet. I'd like to thank the Herald News, Fall River Media Government TV, and Bristol Community College for hosting this event tonight and providing the public opportunity for the public to understand better the positions of the candidates running for this office. When I had the honor of being elected your state representative last year, I promised you that I would hit the ground running. From September through now, I have worked tirelessly and used my experience to navigate through the halls of Beacon Hill to pass legislation to improve the city and the area and quality of life throughout this area. Although I was newly elected as your state representative, I was able to work with my colleagues to accomplish many things in the past year. For instance, in this past legislative session, I helped secure $2.3 billion in bonding for South Coast Rail design and construction. Passed comprehensive welfare reform to eliminate fraud and abuse. Voted to raise the state minimum wage to $11 an hour to help our working families. Secured bond funding for $7.5 million for future city pier improvements. Helped to increase local aid $2.7 million over last year. Voted to secure more than $340,000 for pothole repair. Increased funding for councils on aging. Led efforts to establish a drug court in Fall River and passed a substance abuse bill. Delivered $100,000 to BCC to address issues pertaining to Fall River's chronically high unemployment levels. Voted to repeal the anti-business technology tax. Secured bond funding of $500,000 for Braga Bridge lighting design, and passed comprehensive gun violence legislation. In addition to working to pass these legislative initiatives, I believe that it's important to personally meet with people to better understand their needs, issues, and concerns. And to ensure that we could meet together, I established regular meeting hours in my local offices at the Fall River Registry of Deeds, as well as the Freetown Town Hall and the Freetown Councils on Aging. I initiated coffee and conversations with Carol at local restaurants throughout the district to enable people to meet with me in a comfortable setting in their neighborhoods. I also initiated walk-in talks with Carol in neighborhoods along the waterfront, at BCC, and the trails of our bioreserve as a means of staying in touch with those of you who elected me. While it's true that we have accomplished a lot together, there's still much more to accomplish. I, like you, want to see this city and district continue to move forward and reach its unlimited potential. That's why I'm running for re-election. However, I cannot do it alone. I sincerely hope that I've gained your trust during this past year and ask for your vote of re-election on November 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Next statement will come from Dr. Steinhoff.
And thank you very much. I too would like to thank the Herald News, BCC, Government Cable. My name is David Steinhoff, candidate for 6th Bristol. We had faced off last year in a very similar race, special election, and we lost a very narrow race. During that election, we tried to stay focused on the issues, the things that differed my opponent from myself. We worked hard to do that. We knocked on countless doors in order to win your vote and your support, and it seemed that we were successful. We came very close to that. We came within 321 votes of taking out my opponent. And actually, this year, we're growing even faster. We're knocking on even more doors. But this year's race has changed. Instead of focusing strictly on the potential issues that we would like to discuss, this race has morphed, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, there are differences between us. My opponent said that she's voted on countless bills and described them aptly. When we look through the bills, you can see that many of the bills that she voted on did not specifically address local aid and local issues. She voted 98% of the time with the Speaker and 100% of the time with the Speaker during the year 2014 so far. That does not serve our local area. What we're finding, though, even more distressing than that, is that my opponent has shown that she is capable of doing just about anything, her and her husband, to unseat our campaign. They've turned it from politics about issues and about political philosophy into a political campaign designed to take out somebody at any cost. From Mr. Fiola, Attorney Fiola, stealing signs that belong to my campaign and simply trying to say that he was doing it because they were on public land, when in fact we know that Mrs. Fiola's signs were all over public land throughout the city. We know that this campaign took a bad twist. And it went on as far as anonymous mailings leading the Herald News to a recent article, something that addressed my family. I had the opportunity to address Mrs. Fiola's family and something that they dealt with years ago, and I refused to do so during the last campaign. Unfortunately, they did not. And though my opponent claims to be above that and not associated with it, I think the readers, I think the voters of this district can see through it. What we're dealing with right now, ladies and gentlemen, is a tale of two cities. A city that belongs to the average person, the average taxpayer, and another city on top of that that seems to belong to people who think that they are privileged and above the law, who take an entirely different view. I want to represent you, the average person. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, the 6th Bristol District deserves more. Fall River and Assonet needs to vote. Be the change. With your vote, we will change this. We're about to have a recall. We're about to unseat the mayor. It's time we make some drastic changes to our elected officials so that we can represent this local area. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our first question, which will begin with Dr. Steinhoff. Kind of a broad topic here, but there's been a recent effort and discussions about the rebranding of Fall River. How would you brand Fall River?
Well, how would I like to brand Fall River as one of the cities with one of the most potential. I've been saying that from the very beginning. Because we have an enormous workforce ready to go to work at various skill levels, we need access to the jobs. And that's something we've been talking about right from the beginning. Bringing industry in, which has been one of the jobs my opponent's husband, Mr. Fiola, has been working on. Unfortunately, I believe very unsuccessfully, and I believe a lot of people agree with me. It's time we take a different tact. It's time we open up that waterfront, and I've been saying it from the beginning, for industrial shipping, so that we can then have access to the rail, improve transportation for people from this city or other cities that need to work here or go north. There are many things we can do. Fall River is the city of the greatest potential. After all, based on some of the stats in the state, one of the lowest per capita incomes, second only to Lawrence as far as being low. We have enormous potential. We can grow from here. We have access to all the highways, access to the second deepest deepwater port in this state, and we have a rail that is ready to go. We do not have to put that off for 10, 12, or however many years it's going to take to make South Coast Rail, as we're talking about it, a reality. Right now, Mass Coastal is prepared to start working on that rail if given the time, if given the contracts with their mother company, and inject private funding so we could have moderate transportation through that rail, the existing rails right now, within as little as a year. Potential is what this city is all about.
Thank you. Carol, how would you brand Fall River?
How would I brand Fall River? Well, we've been working on that. We've been investing hundreds of millions of dollars of private and public investment along our waterfront, and that really is the focal point of where our community is headed. It is branded to bring the historic along with the new investment to the views of our community are paralleled, second to none. There is no other community that has the views, the waterfront access that we have. We've just been putting in hundreds of millions of dollars on our waterfront, and I see the future of our culture, our arts, our workforce, everything coming together, because this community will be a tourist and a recreational destination. We have the first phase of a couple of $100 million of investment going on. We've been working for 2 years now on that next phase of the waterfront, Route 79 North, which, talking about issues, David, I've been dealing with the issues, dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars delivering to this district specifically. In the last year alone, we've been delivering the local money, the local aid, Chapter 70, Chapter 90, economic development money, economic development bill money, all of these things, BCC money, education for higher ed, workforce training, all of these things have been coming in. And when they all come together with the development on our waterfront, with the Route 79 North that meets the project now, along with this rebirth that we're having, this community is going to be second to none in the Commonwealth. We are blessed to have the views that we have, the landscape that we have, the rich history, and so we're going to pull all that together. And I see the brand of this Fall River is this waterfront this waterfront community with so much potential.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to respond to that?
Yes. Mrs. Fiola keeps claiming that she's voted for local aid, and yet I have bills. Let me see if I can dig one up specifically. Okay, where there was an opportunity to vote an additional $50 million in local aid. And that was Bill 3951, House Bill 3951. Mrs. Fiola actually voted against that additional $50 million in local aid. I don't see the sense in that. Local aid is what we need down in this city more than anything. We need the local aid, we need the discretion by our local school board, our school administrators, our police and fire to utilize that money to bring us up. Voting, as I said before, 98% of the time with the speaker during your entire tenure and 100% of the time during just 2014 means that you're voting on bills to serve Beacon Hill, Boston, and the communities that exist up there. The dichotomy between Newton, between Quincy, between Wellesley, and this city is enormous. Their average income in Newton is over $110,000 per capita. Ours is 20. There's no comparison. We need to start treating us as if we expect and demand additional local aid.
Okay, thank you. Carol, would you like to respond?
Well, I knew this was going to happen. Those of you watching, if you've been following anything in the state, there's a group called Mass Fiscal Alliance, and they've attacked about 20 candidates, Democratic candidates. The Republican Tea Party has done that through Mass Fiscal Alliance, and they picked a procedural vote. We already voted on local aid. We delivered $102 million just for the schools in Chapter 70 funding, plus another $900,000 recently for the transportation, plus hundreds of thousands more, along with $25 million in general funds that the city can spend discretionary. That is a procedural vote that was taken place by the Republican Party just so that you could have this ammunition today. We vote for more local aid than we've ever had before, and I am so proud to be a part of this delegation to help deliver as much as possible for this community.
Okay, I think we're going to move on from here.
All right, go right ahead.
You discussed South Coast Rail previously. There's a ballot question that voters across the state will tackle when they go to the polls on November 4th regarding the automatic escalator within the gas tax. What is your position on question 1? How will you be voting on that?
Okay. As you know, the gas tax was put into place. I did not vote for the gas tax, even though my opponent has publicly gone on record to say that I have. I was not even in office at the time when the gas tax was voted on. Having said that, this vote will be to repeal the gas tax of 3 cents per gallon and then an indexing. I have seen the transportation crumbling in our Commonwealth. In my own district here, we have 8 bridges that are all in complete disrepair. Our highway, our roads, bridges, built in 1950, are falling apart. And right now, we have no stream of funding specifically targeted for transportation projects. We're going to begin rebuilding the Herman Street Bridge in my district soon for a couple of, maybe it's going to be about $3 million or more estimates. That's going to start. We have a dire situation, not only in the nation, but in this Commonwealth. South Coast residents pay more due to the damage and transportation costs than any second in the Commonwealth in terms of a region. This 3 cents per gas tax, which is going to go into place that I did not vote on, will happen in January. There will be indexing, and I will not vote to repeal the gas tax.
You will not vote to repeal. I hope people are as equally confused about your answer as I am. But let me clarify. You did actually say that that tax that was talked about last year during the campaign, the one that involved the gas tax, the cigarette, and the tech tax, was a fair compromise. Governor Patrick wanted to add taxes to that. You reportedly said that that was, and that's a quote from WSAR. I can give you the exact date. It was July 15th, 2013. But that being said, no, you didn't vote on it. You weren't in office at that time. This automatic gas tax, though, is something you would have supported. I said from the beginning, made no sense. It's a regressive tax. It's designed to hurt people like the people in Fall River who earn the least, who need that extra relief to get up to their jobs 10 miles, 20 miles out of the city. That tax wouldn't affect somebody driving around in a $100,000 Range Rover, but it will affect a person who is struggling to make ends meet on minimum wage. Even though minimum wage is going up, it's still nearly impossible to make families survive on that kind of pay. That's a regressive tax. The tech tax would have destroyed us. You still talked in favor of that, Carol, even though you backpedaled later on. The tech tax was absolutely abhorrent then, and it is now. Thankfully, it didn't go through. And I'm glad you at least acknowledged the delegation you work with, as if some of those bills you voted on and described were all your initiatives. You've been working with a delegation. South Coast Rail is something that started years before you ever became part of that delegation. So you can work with them, but please do not insinuate they're your initiatives. Thank you.
I don't believe you answered how you will vote on that. I think it.
I would vote against the. I would vote to repeal it. Vote yes on question 1, which is to vote to repeal the automatic gas tax.
Okay. Carol, you'd like to respond?
Okay, so David, I remember the debate we had here at BCC where I was against the tech tax, and I thought it was, I thought it was something that should be looked at, and it was. The first vote that I made as a state representative was to repeal the tech tax, okay? So having said that, I have the privilege of serving now, which you don't, and I have the privilege of seeing what's happening with our roads and bridges. We want South Coast Rail. but we don't want to figure out ways to pay for it. We want to have our roads and bridges repaired, but we don't want to have a way to pay for it. Those people who do not travel far will pay less on the gas because they'll use less gas. Those who do a lot of travel will pay accordingly because they travel further in their car. 3 cents was put into place before me. I did not vote on that tax, but I will not vote to repeal it because of the concerns with the transportation needs of this Commonwealth are severe, they're dire, and bridges and roads are crumbling, and I see that in our district.
I agree with you. It's despicable. This state ranks about 47th to 48th in the country for maintenance of its roads and bridges. But that tech tax, that gasoline, that automatic gasoline tax that is indexed to go up with the consumer index each and every year without us being able to vote on it, that is not going to generate money. There's no promise that it will go right back into the DOT. There is no promise. The governor even held back $100 million that he promised us for our roads and bridges. So that money didn't make it back to our local roads and bridges, and the insinuation that it would was frivolous. If the money would be dedicated to a DOT, perhaps some type of a tax with a sunset clause could be implemented, but not a continuous tax that will raise itself based on the index.
One last statement.
I'm going to move on. It's about
Okay.
on the same topic. So, if elected and the gas tax is repealed, you will be faced with the task of continuing to fund transportation infrastructure projects from South Coast Rail to the regular maintenance of the state's highways and bridges. So without that extra funding, how would you propose getting transportation infrastructure projects funded? We start with you, David.
All right. Well, first of all, my take on the South Coast Rail is I would love to see high-speed rail right down into our area. We are one of, I think, 3 cities within a 50-mile radius of Boston that does not have that access. Providence has that access. We don't. I would like to see it, but the idea that $2.5 billion and some 10 to 12 years away is going to serve our needs now is wrong. I would rather see the existing rails used, as I said before, by Mass Coastal, so that they can use far less money to get us that transportation now, even if it is at a slower speed. How to pay for that and how to pay for our roads and bridges is to attack the waste and fraud in our existing budget. A few examples: the crime lab scandal, $332 million waste. The toll taxes severance pay or bonds, $24 million in waste. There are a total of $2 billion of wasteful spending listed in this list alone. For instance, the $500 million spent just to get us up to speed with the new healthcare connector, and it's still not working. Those are the kind of things we need to be attacking: waste and fraud. Another bill, another group of legislators instituted, put forth to try to address waste and fraud. And when I reviewed your vote again, I saw attempts to avoid any type of reconciliation or review of waste and fraud. Waste and fraud is one of the biggest problems we have in this state. It's been a constant problem. We are one of the last states to pay our tax liability. We are one of the most indebted states in this country, and yet we have excess revenue. We don't have a tax problem, we have a spending problem.
Well, I'm not going to get into those numbers because I don't have enough time to refute
Like
you
to
on
look
some
at
of
them?
those, but they're your numbers, and I would love to get into it with you. But let's talk about the existing rail that you said you'd like Mass Coastal to work on. They've been working on that. You've already seen that. We already see what's happening. We have all of the ties being replaced. We're working with Mass Coastal. This is old news, David. These lines are being shored up. They're being replaced thanks to what we've been doing over the last several years. These tracks are being upgraded as we speak in preparation of South Coast Rail. So that's being done. That's going to give a higher speed for the freight that's coming in now, and it's going to help our local businesses. And then they can do some light recreational train. But we do need South Coast Rail. How are we going to pay for it? You need to figure that out. It's easy to say when you're not in office what should be done, waste and fraud. We just voted on the biggest welfare reform bill. We work on waste and fraud. We have been working on South Coast Rail and having a solid plan toward funding it and putting that in the bond with a plan for it. It's reality. And when you look at the needs, what's going on with rail, it's underway. We have 3 of our own bridges in Fall River being all repaired and replaced to be in preparation of South Coast Rail. We have all those ties already done, David, so that's old news. If you had attended even one meeting on South Coast Rail in the last 2 years like I have, one planning session like I have been, public meetings, you would be aware of that and up to date on it.
Oh, Carol, actually, that is not old news. There's nothing showing us that we're going to have that transportation, the residential transportation on those freight rails. It's very possible. And the discussion I had with people from Mass Coastal when I spoke to them personally was that they need the additional income, the contract, and the ability to do so. But that hasn't come forth yet. Our legislators haven't approved it yet. But that's something we could have right up to the Quincy Connector, the bottleneck. And there's no reason why we can't have it sooner. We can't have it within a year. So you're talking about increased speed for freight, that's fine. We're talking about having transportation for people. And you talked about waste and fraud. Well, you voted against having preventers to prevent people from using EBT money out of this state. Okay, that kind of money should not be spent out of this state and other locales where people claim a residence in this state, go off to another state and utilize the money that this state provides them. That's the kind of waste and fraud I'm talking about. It goes all through our budget. $9 million for the governor's rehab of his office. We've seen something like that here in the city alone, and people are fed up with it.
Carol, would you like to respond?
Actually, I did vote against out-of-use money for EBT cards, and it's right here in my notes. So you might have said I voted 98% of the time, but I did vote against that. So it's easy to throw around things, David, when you're not in the trenches fighting and working. But Mass Coastal Rail, we work with them, and if you show me the legislation that we didn't work on for them, I'd be glad to see it, because it doesn't exist.
Moving on to our next topic. With the recent closure of the Fall River landfill, what vision do you have for the reuse of the site that is not needed for the recently opened transfer station? I'll start with you, Carol.
Well, as part of my tasks when I got elected as a state representative, I got a chance to go up and visit the landfill, and I toured the top of it as it was, getting ready to close, just to see what it was like, how much land there really was, and nothing like going to visit and see it. So I spent some time up on the top of that god-awful hill and saw the most breathtaking views possible. Unfortunately, some of the landfills had plans and set into place early on in their contracts that would help communities know that they could reuse them after and what those uses could be. It's my knowledge that this landfill never had that kind of a reuse plan. So we don't have one right now. But I think that's something that this community needs to look at. I know that there's issues with weight, because you can only have so much weight pressing down on that hill, on that big mound. And so there's a lot of considerations that are real, but I can see something that takes advantage of that absolutely breathtaking view that I saw, and maybe some kind of an attraction where you have a preserve, or you have some kind of a recreational, but it has to be limited in terms of weight. Maybe some golfing, there's unlimited opportunities and for that gorgeous site, but they have to be worked on. It is privately owned. We don't own it. A private company owns it. So that kind of conversation has to happen between the city, and I see some use that takes advantage of that gorgeous view.
Okay. Now, I've actually been up on that landfill. I used to bring some of the waste from the reconstruction of my office up to that landfill. That thing is enormous. I've seen successful implementation of landfills, such as in Seekonk, where they turned it into grounds behind the library. They used a partial landfill, but that was planned for, and it wasn't nearly as enormous as the landfill here in Fall River. With the toxic chemicals that could be up in that landfill and the other waste that could be there, I don't see how and why we would want to generate money to spend or find some project to perform up in that landfill. If it's privately owned and they want to find something to do, maybe they can find some way to turn it into a ski slope for Carol's friends up on Beacon Hill. With a beautiful view up there, but I have no interest in wasting local aid and local money, which we need desperately for training of our workforce, for bringing on more police officers, more firefighters, for increasing access for students to better programs in our schools. I see no need to waste any money on something like that. Let the private concern figure it out for themselves.
Care to say anything?
But basically, that's what I said. I see what I can vision for it, but we don't own it. It's a privately owned piece of land, so it will be up to them. And we hope that they will work with the community when they make some plans, if they do, and share them with us, and work together with the community should they want to continue to invest.
Anything else, David?
How about that landfill? No.
Next question. Voters in some districts across the state, including the 6th district, are being asked to weigh in on a non-binding question regarding the licensing and inspection of non-hospital facilities that provide more than 10 abortions a year. If this measure, regardless of the outcome of this measure, will you follow the voters' will of the 6th district? David, we start with you on this.
Regardless of the outcome, see, I personally would like to see inspection of those facilities. I think it's necessary as a healthcare provider. I feel I welcome inspections of my facilities when and if necessary. We try to follow all the regulations. We're talking about facilities that can perform abortions, and that situation resulted in, I believe it was 2007, the death of a young girl out on the Cape. That's absolutely unthinkable in this day and age with modern medicine available. That a facility, simply because they did not have the materials to check on their blood pressure cuff was broken, their staff was not trained in CPR, that's absolutely absurd. If they're performing that many abortions, or any abortions, they should have some type of check on their facility.
You said
I believe
your
that
position,
check,
but
that's my position.
If the voters of the district say no to this question, would you follow the will of the voters or your personal preference?
I would take into consideration the will of the voters, and I would certainly work to educate the voters and work to see that those facilities are tested. I believe that strongly in it. This facility that's dealing with the life and death issues concerning young women who are having abortions should be checked, and they should be proven to be adequate facilities and have the adequate care. I mean, I have to keep certain equipment in my office in the event that somebody goes into cardiac arrest. I have to keep that kind of equipment on hand, and I'm a dentist. They're performing procedures that could lead to bleeding out, hemorrhaging of young ladies unexpectedly, quickly. They need to be able to handle that.
Carol?
Certainly, I am an incredibly strong proponent of safe, healthy health care for women, and that's what this bill is about. And I certainly would like to also say that, obviously, any facility that conducts any kind of medical procedures should be licensed or have the same standards put against them. So if the people put this forward, certainly we should respect that. It's 11 districts out of all of the districts. So, you know, it's only in its infancy stages because, as you know, it wasn't one of the binding issues on the referendum, but certainly all healthcare issues like that should be well taken care of. And if a clinic should be licensed, a dentist should be licensed clinic, a dermatologist should be a licensed clinic, all clinics that perform certain procedures should be looked at.
Anything further?
No.
Okay. Carol, this question will start with you. Fall River has essentially met its charter school seat capacity, but legislative measures have been presented to expand capacity in low-performing districts. How do you feel about this measure?
Well, you know, I was a proponent of the charter schools and voiced my support for all of the charter school applications that were in play. And it has resulted in charter school increases, and we did receive our allotments. We don't have any other scheduled or planned at this time. I actually also received the Mass Teachers Association supporter of charter schools, and also received the Mass Teachers Association endorsement, which I did not ask for. I was honored with that. I think that when we give our parents and our families choice for schools, we're only doing our children well. And I think that my key priority, of course, as a state legislator as well, is making sure our public education is the best it can be, and supporting our teachers, supporting our families, and making sure that our families have those choices for school.
David?
Okay. I actually am a proponent of charter schools. I think anything that's going to allow our local schools, our local children to have access to better schools, schools that will stay in touch with the up-and-coming needs for these students and what's needed in this local area to help them grow to work in our workforce is an excellent idea. Charter schools have shown a success rate. They've shown that they can do some of what we're striving for at a lower cost. But this goes back to some of the votes. There was another vote where Mrs. Fiola on 3999 spoke about prohibiting debate on amendments relative to local aid, which makes up approximately 7% of the annual state budget. And that was discussing some of the local chapter education funding. Again, local aid that would have helped our local schools do some of this. Charter schools need that local funding. They need to have the flexibility to do this. Reducing the regulations in order for us to have more charter schools is an excellent idea and a step in the right direction. Education, as I discussed with a police officer the other day, talked about one of the biggest things that we can do to curtail crime, to curtail some of the dropout rates in the city. We know our dropout rate is abysmal, is to deal with education at that K through 12 level. Give them every opportunity possible. And that's exactly what local aid is designed to do. Give our schools the ability to increase that education for those kids. So they're not getting they're getting the incentive to go on. Remember now, we have a 14%, roughly 14% of this population that strives for higher education in this city. We have got to bring that number up, and it starts at the lower levels. That's why I'm in favor of it.
Anything, Carol?
Just going back to the comment about my not wanting local aid, do you think the Teachers Association would have supported me and actually endorsed me if I did not support local aid? Thank you.
Anything further, Dave?
Yes, I do. I've seen teachers associations support people simply based on a party affiliation and so on before. So I'm sure that you've had some introduction with this. I'm sure you have some education on it, and you've been working at it. I commend you as far as your level of knowledge about certain catchphrases and so on. But actually voting to get that local aid here hasn't been happening. We had another opportunity to take 50% of the excess revenue, Carol. We had an opportunity to do that on House Bill 4000. Again, your vote rejected that, to take the 50% of revenue excess over our budget needs and dedicate it back to local aid. There's been several bills offering that opportunity to increase local aid, and you keep voting with the Speaker to avoid doing that.
I'll give you 30
Yeah,
seconds
thank
to
you.
respond since
I
you brought up
mentioned
a new
earlier
topic, a new
about
bill.
these procedural votes that were placed before by the minority of the minority party, and this was another one. We had already come together, both a bipartisan coming together to review and discuss local aid that had been discussed, it had been voted on, and it was agreed to. And then a few people came out with this amendment, so in the election, we could all look like we voted against local aid.
30 seconds.
Yeah, well, it has a lot more to do with getting local aid. When they voted to increase it by $50 million, when they voted to dedicate 50% of the excess revenue, when the Speaker decided that was not going to serve their purposes on Beacon Hill, the vote was knocked out, okay? You voted against it. We need that local aid. That's why I keep saying to you, voting with the Speaker 100% of the time does not serve this area. I expect to go up with our delegation, bipartisan, and work on bringing back as much local aid as absolutely possible for our area, because we need it more than any city in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add one thing?
We'll move on. Move on from here. But sticking with the topic of education, as we're aware, the condition of BMC Durfee High School could potentially put the school's accreditation into jeopardy. At the state level, in regards to discussions with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, would you advocate for a full replacement, renovation, or no changes to the existing facility at BMC Durfee High School? And Dave, we start with you.
BMC Durfee High School is enormous. It was a beautiful school when it was first put together, because I was one of the first graduating classes from that school. But now we are in desperate need of some repairs. I would work with the local school board, school administrators, to try to facilitate whatever it is they feel they can best put to use. The building's enormous, and it has, to some extent, by some people's impressions, kind of outlived its utility. That the design that we used back then in the 70s is not worth using again. It's not correct for the school and the students and the size of the classes that we want now. So it might take a complete overhaul. Problem is, having enough money to completely replace the school could put us into another enormous budget nightmare. We will continue to just put Band-Aids on it. I still believe in accessing and doing what we can to have, like I said with the rail, something that is available now or very shortly, rather than some big pie in the sky. So rather than putting a brand new high school off for 6, maybe 8, 10 years until the budget hammers out an enormous chunk of money for it, maybe we need to re-examine the idea of using some of that facility to its best ability, repair it, replace it, and keep the cost moderate so we can have it sooner than later.
So David, repair it, replace it,
Work with the
pay
local
for
school
it,
administrators.
don't pay for it. This is
Repair
something.
it and replace it.
Again, this is
Not
something,
replace it, but
had you
repair it.
known, we've worked with the Mass School Building Authority. We worked with our city leaders in education and in administration, and we've had school building authorities down here last year. And they toured the building, the original plan that was submitted. If you know how it works, through the treasurer office, there's a certain pool of money that gets designated, and then communities vie for that money. Durfee put in a proposal for a rehab. That rehab ended up being looked at, and they said, are you kidding me? This building needs to pretty much go. And they said, really, put another proposal in. So sitting right now is a proposal by the Mass School Building Authority in their offices of a rehab of Durfee that is really, in essence, a new Durfee. It would be on the same site. The plans were constructed, and it's actually, because there's a few things in that building that cannot be replaced, so those would remain, and a new structure would be put in place. And again, we would be faced with approximately an 80% reimbursement from the Mass School Fund. It's practically free money. If any of you have seen the new Somerset Berkeley School, these are state-of-the-art, quality buildings. And if we're going to do one and they're willing to approve us, why shouldn't we have what Westwood and Dover and Sherborne and Somerset Berkeley have? It's in need. At the same time, we have a proposal in for the Diamond, an addition to Diamond, which is so desperately needed based on the waiting list that they have. So we have two opportunities. We are hoping and working to see that these can come true, but these have already been on the drawing board, and we're now waiting for Mass School Buildings to react to those plans.
Anything further?
Okay, sure. Another pie-in-the-sky type of dream, something we can't see the reality of just yet. I understand your insinuation that 80% of it would be replaced, but no money in this state is free. As indebted as this state is, that will be money that will be taken away from something else that we need. We talked about roads and bridges. We talk about additional police force, firefighters, etc. We can't just expect this state to fund an enormous budget issue like that, as much as it would be nice to have a brand new high school. Considering the repair of that building, if at all possible, might prevent the nightmare that we're going to end up dealing with when we have to push students around. The enormous size of that school cannot be facilitated part-time while we're rebuilding a building like that.
May I please, just for clarification, yes, it can, because the plan has already been evaluated and looked at. And number two, that 80% is not free. You're absolutely correct. But it's already in the plans. It's already been planned for. This is what legislators do over the years. This Mass School Building Authority, a penny of your purchases go into that fund. And that's what each year funds your tax that you're already paying. A penny of your sales tax goes into that fund. And that's, just to teach you how this works, David, that's what pays for these reimbursements. And your reimbursement percentage is based on your economics in your communities. So it is free to Fall River because we've already paid for it, and so is everybody else in the state. And the Mass School Buildings looks at that. And they've looked at the cost of rehabbing versus this replacement, and it's the same amount of money, basically. So a replacement would make sense. So either way, we'd love to see that happen, and we want just what everybody else has.
Well, thank you for the attempt at an education, Carol. But as I said before, if we put money aside for some project, and that project is not getting the absolute state aid, and we're about to elect a new governor, if that governor or if something else falls through, if we do not see some of the funding that we've been promised before, just like the $100 million that was promised for our roads and bridges that got taken back last minute, then we could see that same plan die on the drawing board over and over again. If there is a better way, a less expensive way to get us a decent facility back on track, I think we need to be considering that and spending money elsewhere.
We did.
30 seconds to close this out.
We did look at that. And there is funding put aside. That's called Mass School Buildings Authority, and that's what they do. And that money comes from a penny of sales tax, goes into that fund, and it's already planned for. We deserve the best we can get, and let's hope we can be on that list.
With the race for governor currently a toss-up, how do you envision working potentially with a governor of the opposite party to ensure the district needs are met? Carol, we start with you.
Interestingly, I have worked with both parties. I've worked with the Democratic governors, and I've worked with Republican governors in my last role on the Governor's Council. And each, I think, no matter who gets into office next term, although I'm sure Dave and I probably both have our favorite candidates and probably disagree on that, you have to work with whoever's in office. And so those are going to be challenges. The biggest challenge I see is making sure that, and I've said this all along, is that next governor is as committed to South Coast Rail as Deval Patrick has been, because we see this as an economic boom and engine. We've all agreed on that through the years, and we've come so far. We've just signed a contract for $210 million for more repairs through Myrick's Junction and other for a design build for South Coast Rail that's going to be taking place over the next 10 years. Very, very important. We cannot lose that momentum. The question to everyone is who should be the best person for that? Regardless of who it is, certainly I think Martha Coakley's made that very clear. However, it's our delegation who has worked so well together, and I'm not just talking about our immediate delegation that we work so well together. We work well with the Taunton, for the most part, and the New Bedford delegation. We work as a team, and we all agree on South Coast Rail. So regardless of who's in, I believe we're going to have to fight and make sure that that is a reality and put ourselves before them. And that's what we'll do, because what's right for us is what's right. And that's what our job is, to go up there and advocate regardless who is governor. If it was right today, it's got to be right tomorrow. So we will be advocating fiercely for that, as well as every other piece of the funding pie that we deserve.
David, how do you envision getting through the next term if Martha Coakley is the governor?
Absolutely fine. I've been used to working across party down here. As the Carol put it last time when I discussed the GOP, she said, let's face it, David, down here, you are the GOP. And we're used to being the minority in Fall River, so I've been working with Democrats. I have a lot of Democrat friends and would gladly work with them. The key is we need to have some transportation now. We need to have it sooner than later. The South Coast Rail, eventually 2020, 2025, however long it takes to get the larger, faster rail, that's fine. We can keep that on the back burner. But working with Mass Coastal, to make that a reality now is the key. And I know that I would do everything with this delegation, bipartisan, to work on getting the governor to help support that. I think they see the need to start treating this area as we are more important. We do matter. We've been left out of the mix all too often. I think both sides are starting to see that. And the fact that Charlie Baker is most likely going to be our next governor, I think it'll only behoove us to send a Republican up as part of that delegation so we can work on it. Carol's made issue out of the fact that I'm a Republican. I would be proud to represent our bipartisan delegation in that effect to get that rail down here.
You like that?
No, the only thing I would add to that is you're not on the executive side, you'd be working in the legislature. So you've got to work first through your legislative body. And of course, you're right. You pointed out you would be a minority in that party, but obviously all of us would be working. I'll continue to be the fierce advocate that I have, whether Mitt Romney was in the governor's seat, whether it was Deval Patrick, James Swift, Paul Cellucci, and now whoever else. I will make sure that I am a strong advocate for this community.
Anything further?
No, I mean, I'm not sure what you were getting at with executive versus legislative. Of course, I would be in the legislative part, working with our delegation to make that happen. It would be working with other cities, other members of the legislature to prove that we do need that rail. We can't just keep pounding our fist and saying we need it because we're Fall River. We have to show to other gateway cities and work with other gateway cities in this state. We need that special consideration, and that's what Charlie Baker's been talking about. I know that Martha Coakley started her Gateway City tour right here in Fall River. I know she understands our needs. So I have no problem working with Martha Coakley if she's successful at becoming our next governor, and I'm sure we would do everything we can to make that happen.
Okay. We have just a couple minutes left before we get to closing arguments. I'd like to use this time to get your positions on the remaining ballot questions that will be before all voters on November 4th. So first off, we begin with you, David. What is your position on question 2, the effort to expand the beverage container deposit law?
I don't see the need to contain that, so I would say no on that.
Carol?
I say no.
You say no.
I think we have recycling. I think we have so many initiatives that were not in place when this bottle bill was first initiated, and we've come so far. I think we need to continue working on our recycling efforts and beef those up just a little bit more. We've come so far. I don't think we need to go that route.
Okay. Anything further?
Well, just realistically, there are some companies already in place that are doing the soft drinks, the water, that have already spent a considerable amount of money. It's only going to tax them and further increase costs to those businesses, and that's what we've got to defend against, increasing costs to businesses because that's the only way we're going to revive this economy, give our businesses every opportunity possible.
All right. What is your position on question 3, the effort to repeal the state's expanded gaming law? And we start with you, Carol, on this one.
That's a no for me. That is in place right now. Communities like Springfield are already underway with their gaming, and to take that away will take away thousands of jobs, lots of opportunity, and let the market decide. If there's a lot of argument out there, casinos are in trouble, there's a lot of problems. Let the market decide that. Let those companies who want to invest in Springfield, the one that's going to be built, the casino there, it's already underway. I will not vote to repeal that.
David?
I also wouldn't vote to repeal that law. Leave the law the way it is.
Okay.
See, there can't be bipartisan agreement on certain things.
And just to follow up on the question of gaming, since you both would not repeal, Carol, do you believe Fall River is the right place in southeastern Massachusetts for a casino?
I can't determine that. Only the market will, and the voters. So do I know? First of all, we already went that route. We've tried it a few times, and it hasn't been successful yet. But if a private developer came in here and identified the right location that they felt was the right location, and our voters in turn voted it in, because those are the steps that would have to take place, absolutely. If not, if nobody comes, then we don't have to worry about that.
Sure. David, do you think Fall River is the right place in Region C for a casino?
I think it could be, and I think the voters would have to determine that, certainly have a weigh in on that question. But whether or not the casino would be able to bring in the kind of jobs that we're looking for is the question. I would want to know that there would be some qualifier, some guarantee that the casino would reach into our community for the majority of their jobs, and it would just not be another follow-through on minimum wage only jobs in that casino. I would want some guarantees on that first, even if we were to consider it.
Okay. And as for question 4, what is your position on the effort to provide earned sick time for employees? And David, we start with you on this one.
Any increase on regulations or any increase in regulations on small businesses, I think can be counterproductive. I myself offer paid sick leave at the office, and I think that's something I offer as an incentive for the employees to stay on, to do a good job, to follow through and do the best they can possibly do. If we force small businesses to take on another cost, when there are already enormous upstart costs here in the city, and we are already deprived of businesses. Fall River is lowest on the scale in the state of Massachusetts as far as the number of businesses for a city of this size. We need to do everything we can to encourage growth of businesses. My concern is if we implement that, small businesses will fire back with layoffs or possibly switching out the paid vacation time they might have offered an employee for that paid sick leave. There's no guarantee that they won't do that. So I don't know that it sounds good, but it sounds like something I think small businesses should still have the option to implement to help their employees and retain employees in good faith.
I am supportive of the earned sick time because I'm out there meeting with people every day who have to sometimes make that choice. As sensitive as I am to business, just like David said, his business, he already offers it. And every business that I seem to run into offers sick time. So that won't change. So if you have 11 or more employees, you'd need to offer that sick time. If you have less, then you offer non-paid sick time. So I think it's come to this because there could never be quite an agreement, but there are people out there that I've run into as I've evaluated this ballot question from all sides, and I see that people leave sick children at home, go to work sick, or don't go to work because they can't because they have a sick child. Face it, our community is filled with a lot of single-family homes and a lot of people in minimum wage jobs. So if the people at McDonald's or Walmart or these other stores aren't offering some form of a sick benefit, then they're the ones that may end up affected by this to some degree. But I looked at this as a human issue, and while considering the rights of our businesses and the needs and the costs, and I found that most businesses are already offering something like this. And so I am a yes on earned sick time.
Okay. At this time, we will shift to closing statements. Both candidates will have 3 minutes to make their final remarks. First up, as determined by a coin flip, is you, David.
Okay, thank you once again for hosting this debate. And I want to remind voters that what we've come down to is an election to see if we are going to put a representative up there that will represent this area. Representative's position is extremely important for a city like Fall River because we do need, as I kept mentioning through the entire debate, local aid. We need special consideration. It's not enough to send a representative that promises to do that, but continues to vote with the Speaker of the House at every opportunity. We don't need someone who engages in special interest considerations. My opponent has shown that, as we talked about during the last election, where we identified questionable donations that she took from judicial nominees while on the Governor's Council. She took a donation from Mr. Dennis Eckhurst just 3 days after the special election, a convicted felon. Carol Fiola will take enormous amounts of money from FROWED members and board members. This is the kind of money that leads to special interest affiliation that we don't need from our state representative. We need someone that will represent the people, and not just the few selected people that can afford to donate to her campaign. I compliment her on the amount of money that she's received, and her biggest campaign driver, her husband Ken Fiola, who works with FROWED and manages to associate those deals. We talked about companies he had cut deals with on behalf of Fall River just last year that immediately donated to my opponent's campaign. These are people from out of the district. Questionable donations from people in Rhode Island, far beyond this district. And I'm sure my opponent would suggest that's because they have confidence in her, confidence the way that judicial nominees had in her before when she was on the Governor's Council. But ladies and gentlemen, it's time. If we're going to lift this cloud that exists over Fall River, we have to be willing to change the atmosphere, lift the yoke of corruption, and take away people's chances to go ahead and continue to manipulate our laws and our government and use tax money for their advantage. Collectively, the Fiolas take the taxpayers for approximately $250,000 a year, $250,000. Ladies and gentlemen, it's no wonder they're disconnected and have a difficult time understanding the plight of the average person in a city where the per capita income is only $20,000. I've been knocking on doors. I know Carol said she has. What I see routinely is the fear that people talk about. They've talked about wanting to support me as a candidate, but afraid to do so because of the vindictive attitude that they know they'll deal with from Kenny Fiola. They're concerned that they might lose that FROWED deal. Well, that's not what this economic development is supposed to be about. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a city that is available for all of its residents. So I ask you to please vote David Steinhoff on November 4th, and thank you very much.
Carol?
Well, I want to thank BCC and, of course, Fall River Media, as well as Herald News. David, please, how egregious of you. First of all, I got a donation from the gentleman you mentioned as a felon. It was exposed 2 weeks ago or a week ago in the newspaper. A check went in the mail that day to reimburse him. I had no idea he had been convicted of anything. You can check my records. The minute it was disclosed to me, in the mail, return check. Check that out. 2, I'm the candidate, David, not my husband, Ken. I find it highly insulting and offensive that you keep bringing him into this. I'm the candidate. As far as FROD, board member donations, I have been in this community working as a business person my entire career. You name the member, I've known them probably 20 years. I know them all. I've worked with them on boards. I've worked them in organizations. They know me. They know that I am getting the job done, and they respect me. My husband is not the candidate, David. I am.
Then why was your
Money from, excuse me, it's my time.
Please.
Money from the district, I am honored to have the donations I have, and more of mine, and higher percentage of mine, or almost all of them, are from the district, and yours are not. So let me finish that up and say, in the meantime, David, I haven't heard a new idea or an issue from you, and shame on you with the issues you have going on in your life that I wouldn't dare bring them up in this meeting or anywhere else, and have not. Now, having said that, David, throughout the course of the past year, I have not seen you at one public meeting, at one neighborhood meeting, at one hearing throughout the district, nor have you ever submitted any testimony in opposition of or in favor of any proposed legislation. You are nowhere to be found on the issues of welfare reform, domestic violence legislation, animal rights legislation, election reform, or autism legislation. Nowhere to be found on the issues of increased aid for education, nowhere to be found on the issues of the funding for South Coast Rail, the drug court, the opiate epidemic, minimum wage, or comprehensive gun violence legislation. We had a whole year to hear David's voice since the special election, and he has chosen to remain silent until a few weeks before the election. I live this job. I understand it's not a 9-to-5 job. Anyone that's followed me on Facebook or in the newspaper can attest to the fact that I work long days, nights, and weekends to better understand this community and address its needs. Being your state representative for this district is a 24/7 job, and I love every minute of it, and you could never do it as a dentist, unfortunately. In one short year, I have worked to deliver millions to this district and lay the groundwork for future projects and improvements with my colleagues. Whether you're concerned about any of these issues, I am working on them. You said I said I wasn't going to take the per diem travel, and you announced on the radio and on a video last week that I did. I have not. I said I wouldn't.
Thank you, Carol.
I just want to ask the public to give me the opportunity to return back, and I would be honored for your support on November 4th. Thank you.
That will conclude tonight's debate. Thank you again to the candidates, Democrat Carol Fiola, Republican David Steinhoff, for participating, Bristol Community College, and Fall River Community Media for hosting us. And please go out and vote on Tuesday, November 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.